And welcome everybody to the home edition of Krown Gridiron Nation, coming to you on YouTube as we normally do in the off season. I guess this officially kicks off season 10 in a very unorthodox manner. Speaking of unorthodox, there are my panelists. Gord Randall, making sure that no germs come in or go out. And Mike Hogan, beachside, making sure that he kills germs from the inside, drinking some sort of antiseptic. Now, let's take a look at why we were so excited going into the NFL draft. Two guys picked very, very high by NFL teams. 6'4.5", 238 pounds. Chase Claypool goes in the second round. 49th overall to the Pittsburgh Steelers. The former Abbotsford Panther is multi-talented. He's more than just a receiver. Great football IQ, as he's shown on special teams. And selected in the fourth round, a Neville Gallimore out of the Oklahoma program and really out of Ottawa, Ontario, by the Dallas Cowboys. He joins J.P. Ladouceur and Tyrone Crawford as the three Canadians on America's team. This is a guy that ran the fastest 40 at the NFL Combine in over 21 years for a guy over 300 pounds. Well, there you see them, Chase Claypool and Neville Gallimore. Let's first of all start with Chase Claypool. Our show tracked him through his career at Notre Dame, working his way into being a starter as a freshman, finishing his career as the most valuable player on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish last year. What does Chase Claypool have to do in terms of taking a very successful college career and turning it into a very successful professional career with the Pittsburgh Steelers, Mike?
He has to beat Chase Claypool, period. End of story. I mean, we knew what he could do physically. He's big, he's strong. He's great in traffic in terms of making contested catches. And I think the one question that we all had was, what kind of speed does he possess in terms of, just flat out burning? And when he ran a 4.42 at the Combine, he put a lot of money in his jeans. That answered a lot of questions that maybe some people had about him. But he showed that he could absolutely burn it. And, now he goes to Pittsburgh. He's got a very effective passer, obviously, in Ben Roethlisberger. And, he's got other receivers around. Now you've got CC to go with Juju in Pittsburgh. I think for Chase Claypool to succeed at the next level, he's just got to beat Chase Claypool.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that, receivers in NFL teams, what they're looking for in their players, it's more specialized than ever. And the Pittsburgh Steelers went out and got Chase Claypool in the second round to be Chase Claypool and to bring what he brings to the table. I do think he'll endear himself to his new teammates with the kind of work that he does in the blocking game and in special teams in particular. Don't forget, the Pittsburgh Steelers, in their DNA, has always been, we are going to be a team that establishes the run, and then we'll put it over the top. James Conner had a fantastic year last year when he was healthy. They have a fantastic offensive line. That's what they do at their core. That's going to be step number one for him is to show that, hey, I can get after it in the run game. And then when we do air it out, we air it out. I have a little bit of concern with the quarterback situation there long term. Ben Roethlisberger is coming off an injury to his throwing arm. The Steelers, I think, are really hoping that he can bounce back and give him a couple more seasons. But the dude's in his upper 30s now, so a little concerned about that. But for Chase, focus on the strengths that he has. And then the one thing that came up in this process that he really still needs to work on is he was viewed in NFL circles as a guy that doesn't create a lot after the catch. And I do believe that offensive coordinator Randy Fitchner in the Steelers will design plays to get him the ball where he doesn't have to create after the catch. But if he can show some ability to do that at the next level, that's kind of the missing piece to his game as far as what NFL guys are seeing at this point that can really take him over the top.
How important is it for his long-term prospects that the Pittsburgh Steelers have come out and said that he is not going to be a tight end in a Pittsburgh Steelers offense, Gord?
Tight end is a much more fluid position than ever these days. And especially with teams liking to use multiple tight end sets, that line between a tight end and a wide receiver is more blurred than it's ever been. You get this concept of a move tight end, a guy that lines up in 2-point stance in the slot more than most things, or is the second tight end as kind of a wing back position outside of a normal tight end, and the blocking isn't quite as crucial there. Who knows? There's nothing stopping the Steelers from using Chase Claypool in certain packages in a position like that. And the versatility there is something that can be a weapon for him too. So I don't know that. I think the tight end thing was kind of overblown a little bit because, like I said, it's just. I'll take the Seattle Seahawks for an example. My favorite team and the team that I follow very closely. They drafted 2 guys that were listed as tight ends in this draft, and yet at times they've talked about both those guys already as receivers. So that line is a lot more blurred than it ever used to be. So I don't know that it really matters too much. But I'll tell you what, if you have a guy that's running a 4.42 or hand timed, I think he ran a 4.38. Like if you have a guy that has that kind of speed, I'm sorry, that guy's a receiver. No matter how well he can block, how big he is, that guy's a receiver, and he is going to be a matchup nightmare no matter where they put him.
Yeah, same speed that Calvin Johnson ran, and they are comparable. Who would you compare Chase Claypool to in the history of receivers when you look at his potential in terms of Pittsburgh Steelers receivers? Is he a Plaxico Burress? Is he a John Stallworth, who was larger than most receivers back in the day, but certainly doesn't measure up to him physically? Mike, I'll throw that to you because I'll start with the older guy first when it comes to a Stallworth comparison.
I would guess Stallworth would be the guy. Obviously he's a lot physically bigger than Lynn Swann and doesn't have that. He probably doesn't have the quickness dynamic or getting out of breaks. Lynn Swann was a special guy that way, and we're not going to put Chase Claypool in the Hall of Fame just yet. The one guy, and I know there's a negative connotation around the player now and the person now, but if you want to go back 5 or 6 years or however long it is now, maybe closer to 10, but Aaron Hernandez is a guy who was a receiver / tight end who was very effective. You had the more prototypical tight end on one side of Gronkowski, and if you wanted to go to the double tight end set, you had Hernandez, who could line up in the slot as a wideout, as a tight end, as an H-back. I think that a really creative coach in Pittsburgh can find a million different places to line up Chase Claypool, and he could be effective of all of them, whether it's in the slot or whether it's inside.
Gord, what does this mean for football in BC and getting new athletes into the game?
I think it's really big, and what's crucial to this situation in terms of benefiting BC football is that Chase Claypool is a BC grassroots football guy through and through. He's played in every branch of football in this province. He played community football in Abbotsford growing up. He's played in 7-on-7 organizations with the Air Raid Academy group, so a pretty prominent training group in this area. And he played public high school ball at Abbey Senior Secondary. And it's neat watching the draft and having, I live in Langley, BC right now, and it just so happens that that's where Chase's mom lives now and where he was watching the draft from. So there's Langley, British Columbia being broadcast across ESPN during the second day of the draft. That kind of pub is huge, despite the fact that some geographically challenged intern didn't seem too clear on exactly where Abbotsford was. But shining that light on what we do here. And, I don't think a few people were like, oh, they're talking about it's like it's football Siberia. And I didn't think that they were at all, disrespectful in the way that they talked about things here and did a good job of telling Chase's story when his name came up. But it's really big for things here because it promotes every level of football in this province. And I think that's great.
So let's switch gears and let's look at the second Canadian that was taken high up, Neville Gallimore. I think some people may have been a little disappointed in that. I believe he was the 6th defensive tackle to go in the NFL draft. There was some buzz about him going as high as the high second round. Some people even had him in the first round, but he fell a little bit. Do you think that the Dallas Cowboys got a steal where they picked him, Mike?
Well, as an Eagles fan, I hope not. But realistically, Neville Gallimore is a great talent. I was surprised. I thought he was obviously a guy who was capable of going in the second round. He's got everything you want. He's got tremendous strength. He's got tremendous quicks on the inside. the thing that he's got to maybe be most aware of is, if he thought he was in the spotlight in Oklahoma, try going one state down on Sundays. I mean, he's now playing for one of the most scrutinized teams, maybe the most scrutinized team on the planet. And the pressure is going to be on him there. But, we've talked about him all year and even back into last year just because of the physicality that he brings. He's fast. He's ridiculously strong. And, now he's going to be down on the defensive line in Dallas with another Canadian in Tyrone Crawford. So, for him, he's going to have some familiar surroundings as well, as CeeDee Lamb went down there, one of his teammates from Oklahoma. He was the first-round pick of the Cowboys. So I think that there's a lot of things really working in Neville Gallimore's favor to be a really successful pro. And most of all, it's his talent level. But I hate saying it, but I really think the Cowboys might be a really good fit for him.
Gord, great speed for a big man. Obviously knows how to lift in the weight room. But I think there were a couple of tests that he had at the Combine which may have pushed him down the draft a little bit. Three-cone drill in particular, where I believe he was 23rd out of 25 guys. Is that a concern, and his injury history a concern? It was great to see him get through this year and play a whole season, but he has had injuries in his past.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of guys by the time they get to this level that have injury red flags, and he's one of them. I think the bigger concern is that his production numbers just weren't that kind of jumping off the page level. And that's ultimately what I think prevented him from being attached to some of the top guys in this class, is that the production numbers just weren't that high for him across the board. We saw flashes. We've seen fantastic world beater type games from Neville Gallimore, but it just wasn't every Saturday that he was going to be able to collect those countables. And ultimately, teams are still looking at that kind of stuff on top of looking at the tools in the toolbox. And certainly the tools are very good for Neville Gallimore. His testing profile shows you that he's a guy that should be trying to slash upfield. And I think that that's kind of one of the things with him, is that he took on blocks a little bit too often, as opposed to defeating and splitting blocks. And that's, I think, something that they'll encourage him to do at this level, and something that can make him really efficient. But, the Cowboys have a deep rotation at D-line. He's not going to be a guy that's asked to play every down. And that's a good thing for him. And I think that having a guy like Tyrone Crawford in that same room, and he's still a free agent at this point in time, but Christian Covington, another Canadian, played there on the D-line last year too. So maybe they can bring him back as well. But, having Tyrone Crawford in that room, a guy that knows a lot about where Neville's coming from, maybe a guy you can connect to, and a guy that's been around the league for a lot of years, I think makes that a good fit and a good place for him to flourish too. But man, the Cowboys had a really good weekend, which surprises me, given that Jerry appears to have locked himself in a room on his private yacht alone. Usually things go off the rails for them pretty quickly when he does that. But, CeeDee Lamb, as Mike said, fell to them in the first round, well past where people thought he would go. And then Gallimore viewed by a lot of people as a really good value pick at that point too. And then they get a guy I really liked, Utah's Bradley Ane, in the 5th round, who probably should have gone well before that too. So really good weekend for the Cowboys, and Gallimore's got a good fit on a good D-line group.
We talk about the Canadians and the draft and UDFAs. Let's talk, while we have you guys here, about who are the winners. Pick a winner, pick a loser in the NFL draft. I'm going to throw it over to you, Mike, in terms of who you thought was a winner and who you thought was a loser team-wise.
Again, I hate saying it, but I thought Dallas killed it. They knocked it out of the park, and that's frustrating as an Eagles fan. But you have to give credit where credit is due. The more CeeDee Lamb kept falling and falling, I was optimistic and hopeful maybe that the Eagles were going to grab him. But he's dynamic. I mean, he's a weapon, and they address the secondary in the second round, and then they address the D-line rotation with Gallimore, who can be really effective. I think when they use him, and Gordon mentioned the rotation, you look at the days of 4 down linemen with some backups, that's long gone. Even in the CFL with a limited roster, you never see fewer than 7 D linemen dressed, and a lot of times it's 8 or 9. So you have to have that rotation. Neville Gallimore is going to see the field a lot in his first year, and I would assume that they'll use him more as a pass rusher than a guy maybe on short yardage. But he's a guy that's going to learn. But in terms of a win, boy, I thought the Cowboys had a great draft.
In terms of winners and losers, Gord, are you sticking with the Dallas thing that Mike's on, or do you think somebody did better? And somebody here, pick a loser in the draft for me.
Okay, I have no problem picking both, but I will give you two winners and two different teams than the ones that Mike talked about. So my two winners, number one, the Tampa Bay Bucks. And I'm not going to reach out and include Rob Gronkowski in this draft class because I hate when people do that. But that was a good start to their weekend. And then things just kept rolling in their direction. They get Tristan Wirfs, a guy that some people had going as high as third or fourth overall, fall to them at 13. I think they ended up taking him at. That was a steal of a pick for them. They get Tom Brady, a franchise tackle, which was my biggest concern about their offense going into this draft, is everybody was penciling them in as a Super Bowl contender, and I went, whoa, hold on. That's one of the worst offensive lines in the league. They get him help on the offensive line. They get a running back to help out, and then they get Tyler Johnson, a guy from Minnesota, it was either the 5th or the 6th round on day 3, a guy that is a pure slot receiver and is the exact opposite of what Mike Evans and Chris Godwin are, in a good way. A little skitterbug type of guy, and we've seen Brady have a really good history with guys like that in Julian Edelman and Wes Welker at their peaks. So Tyler Johnson's a guy that profiles as a really good weapon for them too. I thought the Bucs had a fantastic weekend. Another team that did really well and is kind of flying under the radar in my opinion is the Arizona Cardinals. They had Isaiah Simmons, a guy who is so versatile on defense that a lot of draft prognosticators just classified him as an Avenger because they didn't want to pigeonhole him to one spot. He falls to them at, I think it was 8, which is, again, well after where a lot of people had him going. And a lot of people have him as the best defensive player in this draft, not named Chase Young. So that was a really good pickup for them. And then they have a guy I really liked in offensive tackle, Josh Jones from Houston, a guy who I thought should have gone on the tail end of the first round. They were able to get him in the 3rd round. So it was a really good weekend for them. And unfortunately, I hate to admit as a Seahawks fan, but the NFC West on the whole, and this includes the Seahawks, I think, but the NFC West on the whole had a really good weekend and got a lot better. Guys, that is going to be the best division in football this year. I'm going to put my name on that right now. All of those teams are pretty well managed at this point in time. And the Los Angeles Rams, who people thought just over a year ago were a budding dynasty in this league, are now arguably the worst team in their own division. And that's a scary thought when you think about it.
Yeah, I think.
Sorry, to finish my point, because you wanted me to hate on somebody too. The easy slam dunk is the Green Bay Packers, and I have never seen such a flummoxing draft strategy from a team that was in the NFC Championship. They were a Final Four team last year with some pretty clear and glaring holes on that roster, and all they look like that team that was just a couple pieces away in the right spots, and they spent their first 3 picks on a backup quarterback that ideally won't see the field for at least 2 seasons, and then a running back who will also be a backup because they have one of the better running backs in the league, and then a fullback in the 3rd round. And to be honest with you guys, like Matt LaFleur is very close to Kyle Shanahan. They got beat by San Francisco in that NFC Championship game. This, to me, honestly looks like they watched San Francisco's formula and they are freaking out and trying to copycat it. And I absolutely hate that strategy. And guys, in one of the deepest receiving classes in 20 years, in most people's opinions, they did not draft a single receiver. That is flabbergasting. And it's being panned in every circle. I'm going to hop on that bandwagon too. I have no idea what they were doing in Green Bay this weekend.
Yeah, that's what I was going to break in with. If there was one loser, wasn't even a team. I think it was an individual, and I think his name is Aaron Rodgers. Let's go to UDFAs from Canada. Carter O'Donnell leads the list, got a $25,000 signing bonus from Indianapolis to go south of the line. O'Donnell, mean, ferocious. Talk to Chris Morris, his head coach at the University of Alberta. He will not shut up about him. You can talk about Carter O'Donnell with him for about half an hour. Gord, from a offensive line perspective, from a CFL perspective, how how does this affect where you would pick Carter O'Donnell if you had the opportunity to pick him, knowing that the NFL sent some money his way?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question because I believe the writing's on the wall for Carter O'Donnell to spend at least 1 year south of the line. So you're going to have to invest in potentially waiting for him south of the line for a year. Now, we've seen some guys in this situation before. Jeff Gray's a guy that comes to mind for me in recent years who had his had made some money as a UDFA with the Green Bay Packers. I think he ultimately got drafted late in the first round. I don't remember the exact pick. And ultimately was back in the CFL for Winnipeg 2 years later. So that's a recent example of where a guy like Carter O'Donnell might fall, but you may not get him back, and you have to be prepared for that risk. He's a guy, our friend, a friend of the show, JC Abbott, over at 3 Down Nation, he referred to Carter O'Donnell as the best offensive lineman to come out of the U Sports ranks since Laurent Duvernay-Tardif, and it's hard to argue with that. I mean, Gray may be an argument there, but he was very much a projection as opposed to product guy. You have Brett Jones, who ended up going to the CFL first. He didn't stick in the NFL right away. Those are the only guys I can think of that are even in that conversation. So, this is a very, very high potential prospect. And if you're a CFL team, that later part of round 1 is a fairly sweet spot in that's usually where you're getting the deeper rosters. And I believe Calgary has 2 picks in the first round. That might be a spot for them. They love to load up on national offensive linemen. That might be somewhere where they invest in him. Otherwise, yeah, I don't know how far it'll push him. I cannot see him getting out of the second round because the package is just too enticing. I just don't know how far that's going to be.
So Mike works with the Toronto Argonauts. So I got to be careful here. This is a really good sidestep, Michael. How does O'Donnell fit in with the Colts?
Oh, nice. Thank you for doing that. I can't see him not sticking. They don't exactly have the best offensive line in the NFL. They only addressed 1 draft pick in the 5 rounds, and that was in the 7 or 8 rounds. Danny Pinter in the 5th round was the guy that they picked. And then, they to date, they haven't signed any other offensive linemen as a UDFA. So, even if it's just for bodies in training camp, whether that's this year or next, I would expect him to stick around. And, one thing I can say, going into the history of that spot late in the round, the Argos have done that a couple of times in the last decade with the number 9 spot, and they have the number 9 pick this year. We have the number 9 pick this year. Nick Kazur went in the 9 spot and ended up spending his entire career in the NFL with the Patriots. He spent 5 years there, was a starting tackle all 5 years, hurt his back, and that forced his premature retirement. And also in that same spot, Brian Hunter, who last year won a Super Bowl ring with the Kansas City Chiefs. So it really is a high risk, high reward. If you get a guy like Gray who comes back, or a player in the NFL, not necessarily an O lineman, but anybody you pick that comes back, and you get them late in the first round, in the second round, even in the third round, that becomes a major draft coup. But you're really rolling the dice, and I'm really curious because I don't know where he goes now and who's really going to stick their neck out, because I think I would assume every team in the CFL knows how good this guy could be, but how much that signing bonus and the lack of O linemen in terms of depth in Indianapolis is going to do to his draft position. So I'm like everybody else. I can't wait to see on Thursday.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to need to be a team in the CFL draft that doesn't have a lot of other glaring needs at national positions where they can afford to invest in a guy that may not come to them right away, that they don't need that immediate help. There's a couple things that work in Carter O'Donnell's favor that I want to talk about, though. One of them Jim kind of alluded to, which is that he got money up front. He got a $25,000 signing bonus, which is a pretty good sum for a UDFA. It's certainly not nothing, and a lot of these contracts are coming with nothing up front. But that helps him. Another thing that helps him this year is with the circumstances we're going through right now. This is not, some people are going, well, why is this such a big deal? Well, he is being signed already as an undrafted free agent. This is not like where we've seen a lot of the Canadians go to the New York Giants in the last couple of years as a mini camp invite. It is more than that. And there are not going to be these rookie mini camps this year. So, it's a very different circumstance, but it bodes well for a guy like Carter O'Donnell. And I assume the next guy we're going to talk about, Rice and John, in that they have a contract to them at this point in time. This is not just, hey, come down for a mini camp, we'll give you a look. They've got a little bit of a commitment already. That bodes well for their chances of sticking there for at least this next season.
Now, I'm going to hold Ryson John for you for a second here, Gord, because I want to talk about Mark Dequoi, the defensive back out of the Montreal Carabins, who was also signed as a UDFA. And I thought his stock might have plummeted a little bit when he didn't get the opportunity to showcase himself in the East-West Shrine game. But, Mike, measurables are measurables, aren't they?
Oh boy, and that alone got him a look down south. I mean, a 4.35 in the 40 when he had his pro day. If you look at all of the DBs that were eligible for the NFL draft, he had the second fastest 40, and he had the fifth best vertical at 37 inches. He ran a great cone drill as well. So when you look at just the measurables alone, that was going to open the door for him somewhere. What's going to hold him back is when you look at before his days in Montreal, and he's coming off another injury, suffered in the Vanier Cup. But, you look at a 5-year span of his career at the CEGEP level in his first year at Montreal, and he played 5 games in 5 years. He didn't play for 1 year because he didn't want to. He missed an entire year with an injury. I mean, his background is not great. So in this case, with the Green Bay Packers, they're looking at him, I would assume, as a long-term project. But if they see that his background, and he's up against guys who are coming out of factories who have been playing at a high level since the time they were 5, this puts him a little bit behind the 8 ball. But if they see enough in him as an athlete, a guy who could maybe contribute on special teams right out of the gate, maybe this is an opportunity for him to stick in Green Bay. Other than that, it might be a quick 1 week and done if they don't like what they see, because they really haven't invested much in this guy.
Now, what about Ryson John, Gord? You mentioned him just about a minute ago. It really paid off for Simon Fraser to have that game against Portland State and play up in their non-conference game, because he had one of his biggest games of the season, and I think really drew some attention to himself playing for SFU. And it always amuses me when one of my panelists gets into a bit of an argument on Twitter with his former head coach about what position he should be playing.
Well, yeah, I one of the things that I commented on is that he is being treated as a tight end down there, and what the argument was around between myself, Thomas Ford, and the aforementioned JC Abbott was what that means for Ryson John, and I'm of the opinion that it's not going to be the easiest transition for him, because this is a guy that's always been a wideout. He's never had to block in any significant fashion in his career. If they expect that to be a major part of his skill set, that's going to be an added level of challenge for him. They're of the opinion that it's not going to be as much a part of his job description in the way they're going to use him. So we'll leave that in the wait and see category. I certainly hope that they're right about that more so than I am. But again, like I said, let's keep that in the wait and see category. But it bears mentioning that, again, with the special circumstances we're going through this year, small school guys ended up on the short end of the stick with this. There was something like only 9 guys drafted from below the FBS level, which is below the level of last year significantly. There was over 20 in last year's draft. And at the D2 and 3 level, there were only a grand total of 3 guys drafted. So the small school guys did not have opportunities the way they did in the past to get their name out there. I think going down to the Hula Bowl in Hawaii did help Ryson John's case, as well as that game against FCS Portland State. Portland State had a guy go in the last round, or go as an undrafted free agent as well. And so people were paying attention to that film too. And the thing with Ryson John, and this is an ongoing theme with these Canadian guys, is measurables. He's 6'7". Coach Ford was telling me that he's bulked up to almost 240 pounds at this point in time. That's a good profile. And I talked about the Seahawks earlier. They drafted a guy with a very similar body type out of Stanford in the 4th round. So, there is room for guys with Ryson John's skill set in the league. He's going to have to develop the blocking thing quickly. But if he shows the Giants that he's able to pick up whatever role it is that they want him to do, Ford suggested he be more of an H-back type. I mean, I suggest that he would fit into that second tight end in a wing spot, not having to block in line as much, and stretching guys, becoming a matchup guy down the field. It'll be interesting to see whether he can carve something out. And a lot, like I said, will depend on how he can adjust to a slightly different job description than what he was used to at Simon Fraser, on top of the fact that he's jumping from the D2 level to the NFL level. It's far from unheard of, but it will be a tall task for him.
Now, when we come back, we'll talk about what 2020/2021 holds in store for a football season. Will we even have football in the fall? You are watching Crown Gridiron Nation.
In British Columbia's Similkameen Valley, our partner Sonny Dhaliwal and his family grow and pack some of the finest fruit you will ever taste. Thank you, Sonny, for making Crown produce fresh at its best.
Welcome back to Crown Gridiron Nation, the home edition, of course. Let's look forward to what football may or may not be in the fall of 2020 or the 2020-21 season. I wear the hat of President of Football Canada, of course, and we made the decision back in March to be the first national sports organization to draw a halt to games and practices and face-to-face meeting and group training. I think coming out on the other end of this, it's going to be a whole lot more complicated trying to get the game up and going again at the amateur level. At the college level, let's start in Canada with U Sports first of all. And Mike, what are the options for U Sports at this stage? Because it comes down to funding, where there are some challenges with funding behind the scenes, with a number of schools not charging student activity fees, which feed these programs. And of course, coronavirus is going to compromise the length of the season, the training camps, the access to players at the start of the season. Your thoughts?
Well, I'm like everybody else. I don't know. I really don't know what 2020 fall schedule looks like in Canada. And you hear Dr. Fauci say that there's no question in his mind that coronavirus is going to be around in the fall. It's a fact. And which league, which team, which athletic conference is going to take the risk of firing it up and letting it go, knowing that the virus is still going to be around? It's all it takes is one player to get sick, and what happens, and what waivers have to be signed for a kid to play. And you talk about the financial ramifications. This Friday I was supposed to host the Laurier fundraising dinner. It's obviously been canceled. Same thing with Waterloo. Same thing with Queens. 3 dinners I was going to host this year, and none of them are going to take place. That's a good chunk. That's a major fundraiser for those 3 teams, and most teams around the country have a dinner like that where they're going to raise a substantial amount of money for the program. Football isn't cheap, but is football even going to be played this year? If it's not, what schools are going to hang on to football? Is there an opportunity that maybe football is lost from some schools? I don't know. Like it's a really, really uncertain future, and there's nothing we can do but wait, because we don't control it. The virus controls us.
Gord, on the U Sports side, Mike pointed out a couple of fundraisers. I'm also thinking about summer camps that some of these programs run. It's hard financially, especially in a couple of provinces. We saw a flare shot up by the University of Alberta just last week, that they're compromised on all sides, especially with the provincial government cutting back their contributions to universities. How much will football be under threat in this country on the college level? And will it look significantly different when it is played again?
I think that in the short term, football is going to be very stretched and strained by this current situation, to the point where it may make more sense for a lot of universities to not play next season. If it's one of those things where they're going to have to jump right into a full schedule. Now, you may see a restricted schedule, something limited to 4 or 5 weeks or something like that. I don't know. I don't know what it can look like, but the financial thing is definitely a concern. And another example I think of is Lethbridge University's already announced they've cut their hockey programs because of funding issues. We know that these schools and these athletic programs often run on very tight budgets to begin with, and then you further strain that financial reality, and now you've got a problem. I do think that over the long term, it'll recover to something that we see similar to this. But football is a challenge in the nature of the sport. Baseball is a different story as a sport that I could see coming back a lot sooner than football. But in football, you are literally contacting your body against somebody else's. Like your mouth and nose, which is we've discovered as a respiratory based disease is kind of where this is spread most. They're going to be inches away from somebody else's, and there's no way that you can change or control that. And so just in that fundamental nature of how the game works, I don't know. It could be a while. And I just, because there's no way to control the environment and make it safer until we have pretty much completely eradicated this. And I don't know how it happens. I think you'll see professional leagues come back before a lot of amateur leagues. And I'm counting the FBS level and the NCAA in that as well, in that, the money and the business aspect of things is going to change the equation for them. They need to keep going for monetary reasons, and that'll be more of a factor for them. But in the university ranks in this country, it will not benefit most places financially to rush themselves back whilst taking a risk. And so, it very well could be a while. And like I said, U Sports being on the smaller end of things, I think means that it's going to be a longer process than, say, if we're talking about whether the SEC is going to play football this fall.
Mike, many American programs, though, really depend on their gate revenue. There's a lot of discussion about the NFL coming back to empty stadiums. That is not necessarily an option for the vast majority of NCAA football programs, is it?
No, and I think one of the major misconceptions there is among some sports fans or the peripheral fan, probably not the person that's watching this show, but everybody thinks that Saturday afternoon in the United States is a game at Texas or a game at Notre Dame, and that's just not the case. I mean, for every major school that's getting 60,000, you've got a University of Buffalo, you've got some of the smaller schools that we focused on this year, like Ohio University and Nathan Rourke, that aren't getting 70,000 people at every game. It's tough. I mean, and it's also, I think, in the States is going to be weird to watch because, quite frankly, with some of the governments, the state governments down there, I could see some conferences playing simply because the rules of their state, especially in the South, it seems, are going to be a lot more lax than some of the state laws in the Northeast, so to speak. So it really is a mess down there. And with the television money that comes into some conferences, not all, or an independent like Notre Dame, I mean, there's enough money where you could play in front of an empty stadium and probably break even. But for the vast majority of schools, their cut of the TV contract is nice to have, but man, they need those gates, and some schools just aren't going to get that, and some states aren't going to let them play to begin with. And all it takes, what happens if somebody tests positive? What happens if you have a team that has 4 players test positive? Do you shut down the entire country again after you were probably ridiculed in a lot of spaces for starting in the first place? I don't know. I think, again, we don't know, and we're going to have to see what the country looks like and the continent looks like come the end of July. It might be better. It might not be.
Well, the other thing too, that's a reality for these big American schools, even the ones that are in good shape with their football and basketball programs, is that those programs subsidize the rest of the athletic department. And so where we're really going to see it wreak havoc if they can't go is not so much in the long-term viability of those programs, but in the fencing program, the gymnastics program, the swimming program, the track and field program, those programs that don't have the revenue driving capability of football and basketball in the States are going to be the ones that really suffer. And I know that's not really our purvey on the show, but that is going to be the real shame of it, is that those programs are going to be the real victims of this whole thing in those big schools in the States. Okay,
first to you, Mike. Second to you, Gord. This applies to both sides of the line. Is spring football a possibility, Mike?
Ooh, I hadn't thought of that at the scholastic level. That's something that I hadn't thought of, but it could be. Why not? The The stadiums are going to be available on Saturdays for the most part. There may be some scheduling conflicts, but you might be able to move some games to midweek, or you might be able to move some of the other spring sports around to make sure that you can share the stadium. But honestly, that's something I hadn't thought of, and maybe that would give up on this side of the border more time to find a host for the Vanier Cup, because we still don't have one for 2020.
Yeah, hey, you take a look at spring ball. It's a possibility, but just as Gord mentioned, there are a number of sports that are going in spring that they would be up against at the same time. Do you see it working on either side of the border, Gord?
No, I don't. And different dynamics at play on both sides of the border. In the States, basketball is a big barrier. March Madness, the month of March is basketball's thing. It's locked down. They will not want to step on that, I don't think. And it's going to be a situation where it's too much noise. On the Canadian side of the border, the biggest issue is going to be what you alluded to, which is facility usage. You have limited facilities anyway, and a lot of these universities rely on reusing those football facilities for other programs when they're out of season. Depending on the university, track and field, both soccer programs, rugby. Some of them do balance with football in season already, but the more you pile into the same facility, the more challenging that's going to be. And especially for football, it's not that the time for football is required for games. It's that the time for football is required for practices. That is, a football program is essentially locking down that entire facility for 4 hours a day by the time it's all said and done. That's a huge chunk out of the schedule at the best of times. And so you pile more and more teams onto that. If everybody's in the same season, that's going to be a big logistical challenge that I don't know that our universities are equipped to handle.
And the other thing that I want to jump in here, Jim, is with the timing as well. Guys and girls graduate in April. When do you start the football season? In January? If you started in late March, you're still going to have some problematic games weather-wise, which I guess would equate to playing in November. But if you start in March, April, do you keep kids around playing in May and June? What does that do to their need to raise money to go to school the next year for someone? Some of them will have graduated and be gone, players in their fifth year, or some of the fourth years that don't come back. So it's problematic. You kind of threw that at me, and I hadn't thought it through, but the more and more I think about it, the less and less sense that makes.
That being said, out there are people across the country that have discussed the prospect of spring football as a possible substitute for fall football. Gord?
Well, I can't imagine watching an opening night, maybe a Friday night in -40 and in the pitch dark in Winnipeg. I just can't see that happening. And I cannot see them extending beyond their regular school year by more than a week or two. I just can't see it. Too many of these institutions value academics so highly. It's a very, very small window there, and I don't think it's viable. I think if we get to the point in time where the fall's wiped out, that most universities would prefer to just skip the year, basically. And it's unfortunate. I would feel really bad for especially the players playing right now. Don't know if they get eligibility waivers or whatever. That's a bridge we'll cross when we come to it. But I really don't see the viability of spring football.
Okay, let's talk about happier things. The Corniche Award, it will be presented on May the 6th on a live stream on footballcanada.ca and cfof.ca. That's the Canadian Football Hall of Fame's website. And we were going to present it to the winner in his hometown before a spring game, but we're going to be doing it from home, unfortunately, for obvious reasons. That brings me to discussion about Nathan Rourke, who was neither drafted nor a UDFA. He is in the top 40 quarterbacks in most rankings, somewhere in the mid-20s to about the 30 range out of the top 40. Does not having mini camps really hurt the ability for Nathan Rourke to find traction with the National Football League team this year? I'll send that to you first, Gord.
Very much so. He very much qualifies or profiles as a guy that would benefit from having some eyes on him at a minicamp opportunity. What will sometimes happen to these guys is they may not stick with their original team in a minicamp, but other teams will see them in an NFL atmosphere and take a flyer on them too. So I think he's going to have to, though something may trickle in the next couple days. And J.J. Molson's another Canadian guy who's in the same boat there, who is hoping for an opportunity, hasn't got one yet. But I think those guys pretty quickly are going to have to start shifting their focus to the CFL, just as something that may be more viable for them in terms of playing next season. Because leaving the game entirely will be difficult for them. The XFL's had to shut down because of this. The AAF didn't survive last year, so there aren't necessarily a lot of alternative options for them either. So obviously you still hold out hope, but I think for them, they need to start shifting their focus fairly quickly towards the CFL and finding a way to maximize the opportunities there. J.J. Molson in particular as a kicker, not to digress too much from the Corniche conversation, but he's a guy. We just saw another Canadian kicker in Liam Hawryllahu signed down in the States after playing up here. There's a pretty well-established pipeline of specialists developing in the CFL and then going down to the NFL. I think that's a guy who should be shifting his focus north of the border fairly quickly, knowing that still represents an opportunity south of the border for him.
Nathan Rourke has his bona fides. I don't think he would go into the CFL draft with that Canadian quarterback label, would he, Mike?
Probably not to the same extent as a guy, like Mike O'Connor, because, Mike, even though he has all of the credentials in the world, from Tennessee to, going down to Florida to the football super school down there, and then, to Penn State, but then he ends up at UBC and maybe gets labeled that way, as opposed to a guy who did play in the NCAA. There are people who still look at that and level of competition and all that stuff. I just know that Michael O'Connor impressed everybody with the Argonauts last year. They're thrilled we're still thrilled to have him, obviously, and it was great to watch him develop and learn the game at the pro level last year. And he's got a high skill set. There's no question about that. Nathan Rourke, if he gets the same opportunity to get into a pro camp, either south of the border or north of the border, will have his opportunity to do likewise. But maybe there was that stigma around Mike O'Connor. I know the Argonauts didn't feel that way, and I can tell you when there were a couple of instances last year when during the exhibition games, I found myself in the press box just sitting next to, shall I say, somebody, a talent evaluator for two different CFL teams who both brought up how much they like Mike O'Connor without me mentioning his name or seeing him there. So. Mike O'Connor is a gifted player. I'd love to see Nathan Rourke get a shot up here, down there, just to keep that, momentum going for Canadian kids who want to play quarterback and think that they can play at the next level. And, those opportunities are there.
Steve Milton of the Hamilton Spectator did a piece on Nathan Rourke and asked him about the possibility of winning a third Corniche Award. And Nathan Rourke took one finger and pointed it in the direction of Chuba Hubbard, took another finger and pointed it in the direction of Chase Claypool. Now, obviously, Neville Gallimore's on the list, and Eamon Ogbongbemiga, the top defensive player of the year at Oklahoma State, is also on the list. He was asked about it from a Calgary reporter. He pointed his finger at Chuba Hubbard. Is this a question for the Corniche Award at this stage of it just being between Chuba Hubbard and Chase Claypool? I'll throw it to you first, Gord.
I think that's very, very much the case. I think that's pretty much a fait accompli. I think a better question is it set in stone that it's going to be Chuba Hubbard? Is he going to run away with it? I think the answer to that is no. As spectacular as his season was, because of the press surrounding him, people may not have realized just how good Chase Claypool's senior year was last fall. And he, for me as a voter, that was a legitimately difficult decision to come to, which of those two guys to pick. So, whatever the result is, don't necessarily think that it came easy. Should it be that Chuba Hubbard wins the award because he's the guy that you've heard more about? I think that there was some merit to both of those guys in voting for them for this award.
Mike, your thoughts?
In 2018, I had a really, really, really difficult time slotting 1, 2, and 3 on the ballot. Really difficult. This year, I didn't. And that's no disrespect to Claypool or Gallimore or anybody else who played this year. But this was a unique season for a Canadian kid to go out and rip up the yardage that he did. And my only question about the results, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but my only question is it going to be unanimous or not? And that's no knock on any of the other guys, but Chuba Hubbard's season this year was unique. It was special. It was spectacular from week 1 on. And just when we thought there might be an opportunity for him to falter a little bit, he didn't. He showed up every week, and he was just dynamite.
You know, it's got to be mentioned, guys, Chuba on early big boards for next year's NFL draft. Most people have him in the top 15, in the middle of the first round. So, a guy to continue watching for. He is as big of a deal down in the States as he is here in Canada. He's a guy that you're going to be watching play football for a long time.
Well, guys, we'll hand out the hardware, at least hand it out virtually, on May the 6th on the Canadian Football Hall of Fame website and the Football Canada website. Keep your eyes peeled for that. And also, we'll do a recap of the CFL Draft later this week. CFL Draft coming to you on TSN this Thursday at 8 o'clock Eastern, 5 o'clock Pacific, the first couple of rounds. And then, as usual, it shifts over to TSN.ca. For everyone on Crown Gridiron Nation, this is Jim Mullen saying just stay at home and keep your distance.